There's nothing like a spring garden in California, and all year round I plan for just this season. And there's a few things you can do to prepare your garden for spring, and I'm going to share what I do throughout the year. The garden is on a cycle of life, and that cycle begins when last year's blooms fade and turn to seed. This is the beginning of springtime for next year. And when you understand this, you understand how vital it is that you collect those seeds, let some of those seeds fall into the ground, because that is the promise for next year's spring. I collect seed every year and store it, and then in the wintertime I spread it out where I'd like to see flowers blooming in the spring. Winter is a great time to put out that seed because that seed falls into the ground and the rains start coming from the winter and you get those germinating and life comes, and soon you're going to have plants popping up all around. I supplement those seeds with seeds that I buy throughout the year and spread those in the garden. And I try different things every once in a while to find out if there's something out there that I want to add to my garden. In the fall, I plant bulbs in preparation for the spring garden. So daffodils, freesias, tulips, there's a number of bulbs that can be bought and planted here in California and will add really beautiful splashes of color to your garden. They last for a couple of weeks. And you can buy new bulbs every year, plant them in the ground, and you're going to have just a riot of color. And it's a lot of fun to have different kinds of bulbs, shapes, and sizes in your garden. The bulbs will continue to bloom year after year. You may need to divide those, but they're great options for packing in a lot of texture and color to your garden. So in springtime, it's really alive and vibrant. I also amend the soil every fall and winter. I put out a thick layer of mulch, wood chips usually, and put that all out in the garden. Now I do have a video where I talk about how I got free mulch, and you can check that video out, and there's a link in the description that tells how I did that. And it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. I've got a huge pile of wood chips now, and I've spread it out throughout the garden. This helps improve the soil. Throughout the year, I stock up on things that I know that I'm going to need in the springtime, like support for the plants. I buy bamboo canes and I put those as support for gladiolas that have really heavy blooms and tend to fall over. I use them for the statice that I grow, and it really helps to support those plants and they're not falling over on their face in the garden. I make sure before spring comes that I have fertilizer. I use fish emulsion, I use general purpose fertilizer, and I also do ferment weeds, different types of weeds in a bucket full of water, seal the bucket, and it ferments, and it's really, really something that the plants seem to like. So I use that as well. I also stock up on netting, sometimes in extreme cases when I need to prevent animals from eating blooms and leaves. I will drape that over the plants. I don't like to use it because it's fussy and it snags on everything. But as a last resort, I do make sure that I have that on hand as well. I keep on hand some chicken wire too, because chicken wire really comes in handy in the garden. I use it and I make my own cloches to go over the plants, something you can place over the plant, but you can still see through the plant, but critters can't get in. So that's another step that I do to protect the plants from wildlife. Or things like repellents to keep the wildlife from eating the blooms and leaves on plants. So I make sure that I reach out to Epic and I order my deer scram and my gopher scram. I put that out in the early spring, and that really helps to prevent getting the critters eating the garden, because there's nothing more frustrating and aggravating than coming out to your garden and those blooms that were there yesterday and they're so beautiful and vital and the deer have eaten. And that's really a sinking feeling. So we don't want to do that. We want to make sure that we prevent that from happening by getting animal repellents like deer scram or gopher scram. And you can check out those line of products. I'll put a link in the description below. And it's not that I don't like any wildlife coming into the garden. I don't mind the birds and the pollinators, the bees and the butterflies and moths. You get hummingbirds through the garden. They're really beautiful and I love to watch them. They're so entertaining. So I try and make sure every year that I incorporate something new for those pollinators in the garden. This year I bought a little bird bath, but I turned it into a bee bath by putting some crystals in it. I have water features in the garden. But this fountain that I have here, the hummingbirds love it. It has one of those inexpensive solar water features that comes up and it sprays continuously. It supplies water throughout the day, and the hummingbirds absolutely love it. They're constantly at that thing in the water and playing, sitting on the side of it. And of course, I try to plant things in the garden that are also going to be enjoyed by the bees and the butterflies, all those pollinators. And so I really do look at those kind of things and make sure I have a good mix for all the little creatures in the world, except the deer and the gophers and the rabbits. I incorporate a lot of succulents in my garden, a lot of yuccas, a lot of cacti. I just make sure that those are in there too. And this helps me because there's times in the garden when the blooms fade from some of the plants or some of the perennials are not looking so hot. They go through their stages. But those succulents are still there, and agaves and aloes, they add structure to the garden. I get blooms from my aloes, and let me tell you, the hummingbirds adore them. And the blooms from aloes are really beautiful. If you are able to grow succulents in your garden, I would recommend that you supplement your garden with succulents as well, just to give it some structure. And you're always going to have, they're always going to be there. They might go dormant, but they don't die off. They're just beautiful, beautiful plants. So succulents are so many different varieties that you can grow outside in California in the mild climates. I hope these tips were useful for you and that you can use some of the information that I use in my own garden for your own garden to help grow your garden and make it the most beautiful spring ever. If you have any other suggestions, any other things that you do to prepare your garden for spring, drop them in the comments below and let us all know. It's great to share information. I find it's really valuable to learn from other people. So make sure that if you have anything you do in your garden to help that spring really come to life in full flavor, drop your comments below.